Paragon's a 26-year-old product development company. We're an aero design partner. For instance, use a lot of aero parts, parts of the industry. And we own our facility up in Richardson, down in Richardson. They're next to College Rockwell, 10 minute or Shiloh. We basically take customers' ideas and turn them into products. So that could be anything from a small startup company who's got an idea and needs to bring it to market, or multinational companies, which are just some examples. Medical is a big area of our expertise. Wireless, which includes all the IoT stuff. Kind of laughed. Pete and I talked about before. You know, we've been in IoT before it was ever called IoT. And this is just a sampling of some of our customers. I'm sure you recognize a few of those in there. And then that's it. That's my intro. Totally less than a minute.
Wow.
All right. So
Damn.
we'll go through a commercial.
Take notes, Pete.
As soon as I get the windshield, my roller off like that.
Alright, so my name is Alan Hasty. I've been working with Paragon for about 11 years. My job there is to run the diversity program, which means hire non-Aggies.
Right.
So I'm going to talk a little bit today about the S in IoT. And if you spell IoT, you'll notice there's no S.
Not like the I in team.
That's right. So the alternate title for this was the S and P in IoT, which is the security and privacy. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about some interesting cases that were in the news. They're in the news all the time if you're listening. We're going to identify attack surfaces, and we're going to talk about planning ahead. And we're going to wrap it up with a couple of conclusions, and I'll take some questions at the end. I'm sure I'm going to get heckled. I don't know if you've seen this ad here, this cartoon here. It was in a recent past, and it wouldn't be so scary if it wasn't so close to the truth, and it wouldn't be so funny if it was so close to the truth. But what you see here is a cartoon where the Wi-Fi camera says, excuse us while we participate in a DDoS attack. And the broom says, send me $25 or I'll tell everyone on social media that you bought an internet-connected broom. And the fire alarm says, $30 in Bitcoin, or the next time we smell smoke, I might just let you sleep. So,
You don't have no pictures of LED lights on there.
Those are totally safe.
Unhackable.
Unhackable.
Hey, if they're movie lights, they're safe.
they use a different networking strategy. So,
Just call that for you.
So at a high level, very high level, connecting everything to the network has a lot of upside, right? What do you think could possibly go wrong? And the temptation is by connecting all these devices together to the network, then you can do really cool things like you can get reports when display cases are broken, and you can adjust the HVAC from across the room or across the world. Everything is just an IP address away. So let's talk about our friends at Target and their point of sale exploit. For those that remember, Target was the target, pun was intended, of a massive data breach that was announced in late 2013. I'm not going to go through the intimate details of the attack or how it was achieved, but I will share the links that are in the notes that discuss all of those in very, very high detail. The how was they compromised the point of sale system, and the access was achieved. They would gain access to the point of sale system through the HVAC system through a third-party vendor. So, what did this cost the company? They lost 40 million credit card numbers. They lost 70 million non-credit card user information. The cost to Target through 2015 was $291 million, and they hadn't finished paying. So insurance reduced that. The insurance coverage reduced that to just $201 million, if it makes you feel any better. So the point of sale system was compromised so that credit card numbers were exfiltrated through to an outside server, using some malware that was based on a RAM scraping technique, which captured the unencrypted plain text data of the credit card and sent it off to servers. Brian Krebs reports that this black POS malware is available on cybercrime web forums for a mere $1,800 to $2,300 an instance. So as you can see, there's a huge reward here. So all you have to do is hook somebody, buy a piece of software, infect somebody's machines, and you can reap the rewards of harvesting credit card numbers. One of the things Target had done was they actually had intrusion detection systems in place in their network, but they ignored the warnings that were going on. So let's talk about some of the takeaways. Network partitioning, separating kind of your billing systems and your data collection points from some of your other systems is critical in a network where you have payment information going across or medical information going across. And the other thing is, if you're going to take the trouble to buy and install and configure intrusion detection systems, read their warnings. So the next one I want to bring to your attention is Rapid7, which is a security research company. They did a study of Wi-Fi baby cams. What they found was they studied 7 different baby cams from 7 different manufacturers. They identified 10 basic exploits in all these cameras. They ran the gauntlet from having clear text APIs for the local system, having clear text APIs to the cloud, unencrypted storage, and remote shell access, and backdoor accounts that were installed on the devices. So the takeaways here are there was no particular cost number given for these exploits. And the reason is because there wasn't any really money involved. What was involved was the loss of functionality when these units are bricked or taken over for botnets, and also a loss of privacy. A lot of these API issues relate to how they connect to the back-end server and how protected that information is going backwards and forwards. So mostly a loss of functionality and a loss of privacy. So the items described are common vulnerabilities and exposures for IoT devices. Not all IoT devices suffer all of the problems, but all of the devices suffered one or more of these issues. Barely a week goes by on the security podcast, Security Now, where in the segment, Doing It Wrong, doesn't, so barely a week goes by on the podcast Security Now, where the segment called Doing It Wrong outlines issues and problems with IoT devices. And we're talking about products not from little startup companies, but from big companies that in their haste to bring a product to market, forget or overlook or just ignore some of the issues that need to be in place for bringing an IoT type product to market. let's talk a little bit about identifying the attack surface. So exposed interfaces and value. An exposed interface is something that faces the internet. And that can be an API, that can be a simple port that's being listened to, a TCP IP port, a UDP port, it doesn't matter. If it's an open port, it has value. So there's the questions you need to be asking yourself are, what interfaces are exposed in your IoT device? And how is access to your device being achieved? So along those lines, you need to understand your system completely. You need to know what's open, how they're getting access to it, and what interfaces are exposed, whether that's an API, a port, or a web server, whatever. And to this end, what part of your system has value? Let's see where that was supposed to be. So the value of your device does not just depend on whether you have personal information or not. It doesn't depend on whether you have credit card information or not. The value of your system can be simply the fact that somebody can hack your device and use it for denial of service attacks, for forwarding spam, for propagating other malware, and act as a relay to defer detection when tracing is being achieved or done. So, so there's always this tension between security and convenience. And this tension will always exist. And this is where the opportunity for good design really can shine, because good design will minimize or reduce the amount of friction there is between having something that's convenient to use and having something that's secure. And lastly, don't be naive about what your value is, because people that rope in hundreds of thousands of units to a botnet can focus those units to do small things, but when you channel all that down and focus it somewhere, it can be a very, very powerful tool. So this is really kind of the heart of what I was going to present today, and that centers around the development cycle. One of the things I want to make kind of set the stage for is, let's just talk about kind of relative numbers of units, and then we'll continue on with the conversation. Functional prototypes we're calling like less than 30 units. Beta units, kind of less than 100 units. Limited production, less than 500 units. That could be called pre-production. And production units is when you build thousands or tens of thousands of units at a time. So with that kind of mindset, let me share with you kind of what might happen as you bring your IoT product to market. So you get a couple of prototypes and you're working around in the lab and you start, you identify a bug. Well, what happens? You take it over to the debugger, put a new image on it, and you reprogram it, and it's all done in 10 to 20 seconds, maybe 15 minutes top. No big deal. So the development cycle continues and you get a few more prototypes and you get them out to customers. And now you have a working prototype and something is found at customer A, right? It happens. It happens all the time. So something shows up that no one ever thought of, and you got to fix it. So you create a fix, and now what? You've got to update. So let's consider what your choices might be. You can send each customer a new unit. Probably insufficient funds for that. you can send your star technician Fred out to the field and have him crack open this really cool case that we spent a ton of money designing, have him crack it open, reprogram it, and somehow glue it back together. Also, probably insufficient funds. Or you could send the units an update. So you connect to the units and send them an update. And so that's a great solution, but you might need to consider how this could possibly go wrong. So for a firmware update, there are several components associated with it. One of the challenges is that you identify an update and you tell the user, go update the unit. Well, they never do it, right? It never happens. And so this unit sits there with a known bug and a known fix, and it never happens. There are thousands and thousands of Windows XP and Windows 7 machines out there in the world that are still propagating viruses.
I just said Microsoft wouldn't act that way, you just said they do.
Another challenge is, so you think you're going to put a CRC or a SHA checksum on the image, and that should be good enough, right? It'll tell you if you haven't received the correct number of bytes and if they're in the right order for the image that you're about to unpack and reprogram. So that ought to be sufficient. So let's also consider, coming back to the checksum, the problem with this solution for the checksum is anybody could figure out what you're doing, and that the last thing that comes down is the checksum. So they can make a nice shiny new package of compiled code that will do what they want, put a nice checksum on it, send it to you, and you will happily take it and say, oh, look, the checksum matches, let's program it. So that has problems. Next is server connections. So most devices don't know specific IP addresses, so they use this thing called DNS to look up hosts. So you want it to connect to your download.pii.com. So somebody's got to look up that name. If an interested party wants to play games with you, they just poison the DNS. And so now when you reach out to talk to your server, they poison the DNS and the request goes to their server. And they send you a nice, shiny, new package with a proper checksum attached to it. And they, again, your mechanism for update has been defeated. Also on server connections have no value if you don't bother to check that the certificate that you receive is valid, is for the server you want to talk to. Because there have been exploits where devices have failed to do that. So, lastly, when a device gets an image and it verifies it is from the right server, from it checksums, they start programming it and the power goes away for whatever reason, whether you lost the battery, whether you've lost power, electrical power, it's from a wall unit or whatever. So now the unit is in the middle of this reprogramming and it goes away. You can't recover. And so the unit, when it recovers, has this corrupted image and it can't boot. So what happens there is the customer now reboots the device, it's not working, he sends it back, he writes you a nasty review on whatever social site that he's connected to, whether it's through Amazon or Facebook or whatever, and everybody stays away from your product. So having a system that's reprogrammed in place is dangerous in some aspects if not done correctly. So a better solution might have a device that checks in periodically and checks to see if the image that they're getting is correct. Have an image that's signed with your company's private. Not everybody's private key, your private key. Only you should have that. Emphasis on should. Verified connections, check the certificates. Check the certificates for valid. If they're valid, if they haven't expired, if they haven't even come to become valid yet, because there's this valid after date, which needs to be checked. And have sufficient space to have a recovery process that can, the image can be downloaded to your device and then checked for consistency, checked to see that it's from your creators, your engineers, and then when it reboots, have the image go through a certain amount of bring up of the device so that you know that it's operating correctly. Understanding that the new software will run up to a certain point is critical, because that's only then should you flip the little switch that says, yes, this is a valid image. I can safely move the boot flag to say boot this new image. So the point here is that pushing out new products, whether it's IoT or not, there needs to be a way to update the units that is activated by the unit. And if the unit boots infrequently, then have the unit poll for this information. The unit needs to be able to figure out if the image it's executing is up to date and current, and the unit also has received a valid image and the correct image. So the question is, do you release only once you have all of these things in place? Well, clearly, no. But a plan must be in place to put these things together as you move forward through the production line. Getting started down the path and putting some of these systems in place doesn't have to be there on day one, but you do have to have a plan to make sure that as you release more and more units, more and more of the security structure gets put in place. So what does this mean for your development program? Plan to spend time on and figure out how you're going to accomplish these things. I think I should pay myself. So so what are the potential issues of these issues that have been raised? If you're going to cryptographically sign the image, to make sure that it only comes from you, use certificate pinning so that make sure that you know that the host that you want to talk to, you know what his particular signature is, and validate its certificate. And also have more storage on the unit so that for its operating image and its bootloader, so that there is space to have a reliable and fail-safe reboot operation and reprogramming operation. It sounds like a lot of work, and it is. However, it needs to be there. You don't want to be the vendor of the devices that are continuously being fought over by botnets that use trivial logins that can be looked up in a database and causes people like the guy who wrote the Bricker bot to write a device that propagates around the internet looking for devices that it can log into and basically corrupt the file system so the unit won't boot anymore. And at last count, the claims to have as many as 2 million devices bricked. And that was as recent as April. Make your reboot and update process fail-safe. And that means testing all the error conditions, and it's a lot of work. But it has to be there, and as the scale goes up, it increases the significance of how much it costs you. So sadly, in many cases, the update function is platform specific, so you can't leverage it from an open source project or just other projects unless you have a working model in place. So the challenge is to get it done, well tested, and hopefully you can reuse it in a subsequent follow-on project. So the cost to the development of IoT devices is in terms of development time, and it also slightly increases the cost of the devices being employed in the IoT device because you have to have some more space to be able to store the extra images, etc. However, you will save enormously on update costs, and you won't be the victim of no-goods that are trolling around the internet, and hopefully have fewer customer returns that the report back is the unit just doesn't work. So lastly, there's no security in obscurity. So I want to reinforce this by sharing a little activity that happened at our office, right in front of our desktop. We were doing a project where our product couldn't connect to a specific piece of hardware, and we had conversations with the manufacturer of this hardware, and we had some discussions. We agreed that what we needed to do was open up a port in the firewall, and they would connect to the device and figure out what was going wrong. So that was at noon. The password and the username were exchanged over the phone, not through an electronics meeting, over the phone. By 4 p.m. that afternoon, the unit had been compromised. So that was 4 hours. So if you think that if you're 4 or 5 or 40 or even 400 IP addresses amongst an IP address space of 4 billion, you're not safe. And if you use poor passwords, they can be compromised very easily and very quickly. We observed this unit executing code that it shouldn't, executing code that wasn't even on the build image, and we eventually, after gleaning enough information about what was going on, shut it down, shut the board, wipe the image. So that just goes to show you how quickly things can be found, because there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of these bots scanning the internet, just looking for a device just like yours that has a signature. They look up in their database, oh, this is how you attack it, you're done. So if you think there's obscurity, if you think obscurity is security, then your device can't hide on the internet. And if you use simple passwords and you're relying on these facts, you will find yourself owned, which could end up costing you your brilliant idea and perhaps your retirement. So again, this reinforces the idea of obscurity is not security. So issues and tasks. So Steve Gibson, the principal person who's behind the Security Now podcast, likes to refer to the tyranny of the default. The reason why it's the tyranny of default is that there's very little impetus to change it. And we learned this the hard way with Windows XP. Windows XP actually had a firewall from day one. Well, Microsoft defaulted to turning it off. So we went through several years of viruses propagating rapidly through the internet, infecting hundreds of thousands of machines weekly, because there wasn't a firewall that could be turned on. It took until Service Pack 2 before Microsoft changed the default to the firewall would be on. And only then did the battle of infecting machines kind of make the corner. Now there's still plenty of opportunities, as we've learned through history where there are plenty of exploits, even with the firewall on, but the propagation of these things became a little bit more challenging, and it wasn't just simply sending a packet over there, over the printer protocol, and bam, you're infected. So with respect to defaults, if you have default settings that are exposed to the internet, then I would encourage you to force the user to make changes. Also, protect the interface that exposes these defaults, because the last thing you want to do is have some no-good find this API of how to change this default and set it to something that would be problematic. Consider the case of a level that something should alarm at, and consider the case that this device might be applied to a chemical process. Well, if somebody's trolling around and sets the level to something that could be dangerous, then some disaster could happen. So again, all these APIs, they need to be protected. And defaults need to be changed so that they may be appropriate, but at least make the user make a decision. So design a process that forces the users to make necessary design changes. And again, this is where good design tends to lessen the friction between convenience and security. So this conversation wouldn't be complete without talking about encryption. And in the interest of time, the short answer is don't invent your own. Implementing the standard algorithms correctly is hard. So don't believe that you're smarter than the encryption community. With encryption, use standards and best practices. And following on to that, use well-vetted cryptographic libraries. There are plenty of them out there for the different platforms. The Security Now podcast is full of examples of implementers of these standard security algorithms that almost got it right. Right? So it's hard to do right. So use the tools that are available. Use well-vetted libraries to do encryption.
Can I make a comment there?
Yes, sir.
Be smart enough to know that the encryption that you're using actually does what it says it's going to do. We were going to buy an encryption company that sounded great, but it didn't do what it said to do it, so just be aware. I know it does surprises you.
And the other point too is that it's not how good the security is, because this technology is not the issue, right? If you go and sell to your customer, you deal with people that are not technologists, so you have to use standard-based ones where you can say, you know what, trust this organization, it's been better, many people use it. So it's really a business issue. So don't do your own because the best you want to do, you just use it and get yourself.
So one of the questions I have is we're talking about encryption. And that's great when we're talking about the gateway or we're talking about the edgeware, but the vast majority of sensors don't actually have enough memory or processing profile to take a large encryption schema on board, right? So at the sensor level, but you can have enough to send a virus agent or a bot agent into it. So how do you defend at the sensor level when that's the problem?
So there's this tension between security and the resources of the machine, right? Running encryption algorithms takes a lot of energy too.
Right.
So that can be a battery issue. So my recommendation there would be to look to find out what devices are available that can do that with the least amount of power. There are devices out there where you send in a block and it sends you back the encrypted data.
And I understand that there are, instead of like AES 256 encryption, with schema, there are 4-bit encryption, small encryption capabilities as well, but,
Yeah, so-
a lot of them just can't do it, right? There's no OS, there's no.
Well, that's
no
a
access.
business issue, right?
Yeah.
It's saying that security.
Right, and it's a cost and battery issue.
So,
Cost and
so it's
well,
a
it's a
business
cost
issue,
issue.
right? Because if your solution is important enough, you're
Right.
gonna pay for a more expensive device. Because it's like,
Right.
if I say, you know what, I want the cheapest device, I want security, but I don't wanna pay, which means that, your business side.
Choose two, right?
So that you're in a value, conversation.
Devices are cheap, free, actually, that's a
Free.
Right, there's like a lot of the sensors are so small they can't even accept quota, right? You can't do firmware updates over the air because you can't pull it into place.
So I would argue that
Right, you can't do a
too
flash.
much emphasis is being driven by cost. And we're not looking at the bigger picture, which is what value you have. So we can take this and discuss it further. but
Yeah,
let's
this
finish.
is a 3 or 4 week discussion.
I might argue, I might add to that and say that, I might add to that and say that cost, the short-term cost versus long-term cost, which is of course,
Yeah, you
the
never have
public
enough
company
money to do it right
America's
the first
biggest
time.
problem. You may save a penny per unit, but it's gonna cost you millions like the Target thing down the road for that mistake.
Yeah.
And memory's cheap, I mean, I guess ST Micro,
Yeah.
you got a
Memory's not
processor.
cheap right now.
Well, relatively speaking for,
It's on allocation.
Yeah, the
no,
problem, microcontroller, you
Yeah.
get the 16K flash, 32K flash device, 32 meg, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's bleeding event, like ST Micro, their MCU lead times are now 26 plus weeks, so.
that's about lead time, that's about today. I'm talking about from in the normal, ups and
you're
downs.
talking about Moore's law.
It's not, we're not, it's not like the oldest, remember the old days where you 4K of memory and you'd freak out if you had
Right.
to add something in the code. Today we're kind of got a lot more, and with the secure modules, and AS built-in stuff that's in some of the chips.
So this machine here has more memory than the supercomputer that we built in the 90s and the 80s. By orders of magnitude, memory's cheap.
Sure.
It's a relative compensation.
Yeah, like in relative, yes.
It's a relative compensation because memory is cheap, but then again, what we demand the edge to perform also, has those, it's always memory's cheap in reference to what you're asking the edge device to do. I mean, you're right.
It'll always
everyone's
be,
right.
it'll always be the cost equation, no
Yeah.
matter what, always.
All right, so let's keep moving forward here. We can discuss, as I said, I was very hesitant to put that slide in because I didn't. All right, so let's talk about known vulnerabilities. From the Rapid7 research that was done, and I'm going to read this because I couldn't memorize it last night well enough, but basically the way a lot of IoT systems are built is that manufacturers buy subcomponents that they put together in boxes and then they ship out. So from the Rapid7 BabyCam report, we learned that brand name manufacturers of IoT devices tend to implement such technologies used by their products as embedded subsystems and subcomponents sourced from third-party suppliers. The upstream vendors of these subcomponents tend to be extremely large corporations producing millions of units in a given year. And any change to the supply chain can be both time-consuming and expensive. Due to the nature of the time-lag supply chain, individual software components may be months to years old before they get assembled into products. And
That's where I'm going to go.
and so when the product finally makes it to market, it has old, well-known vulnerabilities on a new product. So one of the things that was discovered just recently, witness default, and this gets back to the defaults issue, the default SSH keys that was found by a company, a security research company called SEC Consult, where millions of devices share the same cryptographic key because no one changed the default. All right. So they studied 4,000 devices from 70 different vendors. Right? They were all sharing the same key between products from the same vendor, but worse, the products from different vendors shared the same key. So there was really no excuse for that. And why is this important? Because an attacker using these keys, and they're well known now, can get in the middle of a secure connection, decode it, and extract the passwords that you have and your usernames that you have, even though you're using a secure connection. So again, coming back, circling back around to the tyranny of the default. Using a default security key when you build a product is a bad idea, if you want security, that is. So this gets to the whole issue of passwords and keys. So in order for you to make a secure connection to anything, there has to be this process of authentication. And authentication requires one of two things, either a shared key or public key encryption or a shared secret. And in either case, something has to be managed. So one of the challenges in doing this is if you put your shared secret in the firmware of the device, then every single unit has the same firmware. And that means if one device gets compromised, then they all get compromised. Firmware also has the disadvantage that it can be dumped out and the keys can be found, right? Disassembling code is not hard. In fact, there's tools all over the internet that do it. Most microcontrollers these days have bits that prevent external reading of the device. But I'd caution you to read the datasheet very carefully because setting that bit might also prevent you from being able to update it in the future. Another solution is to get what they call a security device, which under no circumstances will reveal the secrets that it's programmed. These devices typically have a good random number generator on it, which is a critical component in constructing a secure system. Which brings me to the point of how do you manage keys or shared secrets in a production environment? And what you really need to be able to do is establish key management procedures. And as the production ramp wraps up, every time you touch that unit, physically touch it to make a program in a key or reprogram it to do an update at the end of production, it costs you money. It costs you a lot of money. Whereas if the device is programmed and is put on the board, it saves you, right? There's one less step that has to happen. But to manage keys so that every device has its own key, a unique key, this all has to be automated. And again, this is not something you want to try on your first prototype. This is something that you have to have in place by the time you go to limited production or production. Because as the scale goes up, so it becomes more and more expensive, and so it becomes harder and harder to manage all these keys. So establish some good key management procedures. And this also gets to the point of shared secrets and manufacturing at scale. You need to be able to have this information programmed in based upon its serial number, its date, a randomly generated key, and program it into the security device. And save it in a database, an encrypted database. And oh, by the way, make sure you protect that database so that only the right number of people have access to it, right? Because it's sitting at your CM. It's not sitting in your office, it's sitting at the CM. So we've been talking a lot about the update process and things that could go things that are done wrong, things how to do them better. But what happens when things do go wrong? So it's inevitable. Have a protocol for establishing how these vulnerabilities get reported, right? Google has a procedure in place now for responsible researchers to report problems. And they have 90 days. The procedure at Google, or the policy at Google is, when they report a vulnerability to a vendor, they have 90 days. And after that 90 days, that vulnerability will be made public. So when the researcher contacts you and says, your unit is exposing usernames and passwords through this method, basically you have 90 days to come up with a solution. Some of the researchers are responsible, and if you show good faith that you're making progress in solving the problem, they may extend that. But Google's policy has kind of been adopted across the internet, and so if you're just ignore that mail, just be aware that within 90 days, your vulnerability could be published in a paper, in an article, on the internet, on some cybercrime forum. Update your units as soon as you can. And don't let that vulnerability linger, because it will come back and cost you money. And report. The best thing you can do is not hide. There's countless cases through the history of the internet of people trying to cover up the fact that they've had an exploit, when what they really should have been doing is trying to embrace the researcher and to understand what the problem is and fix it. Your vulnerability will be disclosed. So the question is, do you want control of it or do you not want control of it? And lastly, if you are in a specific industry, you might have some financial or regulatory obligation to report these vulnerabilities. So depending on your market, if it's just telling you whether the sky is blue or not, there's really no obligation, right? But if it's some personal data that you're collecting, you may have some other obligations that will regulate it. So that pretty much concludes what I have to share with you. So just to go over what we talked about, plan security from the start. It doesn't have to be there on day one for devices that are prototypes, but as you move through the cycle, more and more of the system has to be in place to make sure that when you get to the end, you're not caught with your pants down. As I said, plan the rollout of your security measures. Being exposed or exploited can be expensive. You saw some real numbers from Target. Unfortunately, the Rapid7 doesn't really have a dollar value associated with it, but it has a significant privacy and functionality. Plan the update functionality. Figure out how you're going to do it. It might be like Wilton says, you have to pay the cost of having just a little bit more memory to make something successful. Don't be so short-sighted as to say, oh, it'll never have an update, or we'll never do that. Because rest assured, like many years of experience in this industry, the first time you get it into the customer's hands, you will find something. And plan for security at scale. And this comes back to every time you touch something in manufacturing, it is going to cost you money. And secure connections are worthless unless you check who you're talking to and whether what they have is valid. And open ports invite problems. There are a lot of idle minds out there, and they're very creative. I would highly recommend, if you haven't picked up on it, I'm a big fan of the Security Now podcast, just simply for staying abreast of what are the issues that are being faced by our industry. And lastly, thank you for coming. The links to the slides will be there as soon as Mike opens up the conditions and invites them in. And I want to thank Hakeem for making this great tool called Reveal.js. These are the links for the references, but they will be in the show notes on that slide there. Thank you for
it's just a problem too, right? Like, this is great stuff, right? If you do an enterprise solution, your cost is that if you don't do all this, you can get past ITC, right? And they're gonna require, they're more trusted vendor, so they're gonna require like third-party integration testing. And, you know, you do that, you have to go through all this stuff. Right? So your cost is not to save the money. Your cost is that will they deploy your solution?
Yes,
Right? So,
exactly.
So that's really what you have to think through, right?
So-
Because if you don't go through all this, your solution is going to because they have too much at risk.
Exactly. So there were many things that I chose not to cover because you guys have time that's valuable and you need to get moving on. But things like cross-site scripting problems with exposed APIs, things like replay attacks where somebody records the data and then plays it back and fools your system. Those are all challenges that face the IoT industry. Sometimes they're like everything in engineering, there's a time and place for everything. And depending upon the value of what you're doing, things may have different solutions. But at the end of the day, you need to take a bigger view of what the cost is, because you don't want to become a victim of like the Bricker bot, where somebody just gets fed up with all these devices that don't have their default passwords changed and goes out and breaks them. Because that device is coming back to you as a manufacturer. It's coming back in terms of a warranty. It comes back in terms of bad PR on social media. It just rolls. So I echo what Milton said.
And one of our customers, 3M, is hacking our system today on purpose, a vulnerability test.
Yeah.
It's a new requirement they have for suppliers. And a very detailed form. It took him all day to fill out a few days ago. And now they're going to go through and try to find glitches in our system, which I hope they don't find.
Can you send me the report?
So Mike, I have a question. So obviously, security, for various reasons, does have some cost implications. It does, okay? Whether it's more memory, whether it's additional testing time, that type of thing. I'm curious whether, and just from the perspective of customers that you have, okay, whether people are saying, look, it's not that important, okay? We don't want to spend the extra money, we don't want to spend the extra development cycles, you know, don't worry about it. Somebody else does. I mean, is that really an attitude that exists right now?
That's a good question. So I'd say that it's excuse me, and the awareness, it is. There's still a, well, we'll get to it later or something on some customers' parts, because it's we look at it and go, well, I get, of course, Linksys routers have this password, but we don't do that, so we're okay.
So they just don't think that'll happen to them.
There, or we'll get to it later. You know, there's a time frame, like he says.
Yeah.
In the prototypes, normally we wouldn't worry about the prototype. Of course, he gave the example where a prototype got hacked in 4 hours.
Right.
Now, luckily, it's a prototype. It's in a corner, and it's one port on one device. You know, but it's that.
Yeah.
And then, but then you do 100. You say, well, that's just my beta run. I can handle that. I'm probably going to have all 100 of those thrown away anyway.
So it just never gets
It
done.
kind of gets, yeah. So some are good, and others get it really clearly and are one up in front end. It just depends.
Shockingly, a large amount just don't understand.
I just can't imagine that living in a world where you're bringing a high-tech product to market. I mean, I could excuse somebody that's not in this space, but you're living in a world where you're bringing a high-tech product to market, and you're aware of all this stuff that's going on, and you just say, ah, that won't happen to me, we're not going to worry
You'd
about
be
it.
shocked about how
I am
many people
shocked.
don't actually like know or understand the security implications.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
They do a cost trade-off, the cost of being sued versus the cost of retrofitting.
So they decide getting sued is okay?
Sometimes, yeah.
Sometimes it actually
It
makes sense
depends, yeah.
to not do it.
I mean, they do a financial calculation, they know what their legal liability is.
So
and if
AK
they feel that
has
it's
something
more
to add,
expensive
too.
to, yeah.
So I just want to, like, I don't know if anybody else caught Rig. They got nailed on Rig for having a backup.
Who did?
Rig. You know, the doorbell,
Yes,
right? They're
yes,
selling
yes.
a security product.
Yes.
Their VP of security verified gets on and throws out some layer 2, layer 3 BS that had nothing to do with the underlying issue with no attempt to resolve it. They're selling a security, a security product, and that was their attitude.
By the way, the one thing nobody's talking about is the fact that there are people that just say, so what? Even today, one of the startups I work with is a company called MacSure, and they make an assessment capability for corporate enterprises that scores based on the NIST framework of 1 to 1,000. We were in at $1 billion company here in the Metroplex, talking to the CIO and the CISO, and we said, so we can do this, do you want to know? And they go, no, we don't want to know. No, I mean, seriously,
So,
$1 billion
let
company
me
said,
speak about
no,
it.
we don't want to know. And we said, really? And they said, yeah, because if we know, then we got to do something about it. If we don't, we can claim that we didn't know.
So I think as time
That was
goes on,
actually
people will
what they
be less
said.
tolerant of that kind of attitude. So this gentleman over here, sorry.
So I know Corey and I both deal with this on a regular basis because we play on the consumer side of things. Right. And the biggest thing is we also have to figure out in Ring and everything else, we have to figure out how to make it easy enough for the user to actually implement the security and actually utilize the security versus not, right? So that's the other big issue.
Because no consumer is going to purchase security. And honestly, they're purchasing the benefit of the product.
It's true.
There's no standardization as far as authentication of yes, this is secure. It has these kind of highly expected until something goes wrong.
Well, it's a really good point. If you are a company that's in the medical space, for example, you're going to go out of your way to ensure that you have secure systems, right? Because you, well, okay. All right, guys. But theoretically, you have an incentive to put up with the extra hassle, because it is hassle. Right?
It's not
But
that
a
much hassle
consumer
that
is not going to do that. You're absolutely right. So it's almost like consumer companies have to go out of their way to make it easy for the consumer, even though they don't need to do it, or they don't think they need to do it. You almost have to force them to do it in a way that kind of gets under the cover.
I raised my hand for like 10 minutes now, so. With Ed's permission, 5 seconds. So our IoT platform, the Monga, has security integrated into the platform, just like you were mentioning, all the encryption, the keys, and all that stuff are managed by the platform itself. And then, of course, if your IoT device itself is insecure, I think you need to have the updates in those features ready for the platform to monitor. But if your device doesn't even have the memory and all that stuff, then we can do that. But right from the gateway up, we manage all the keys, the passwords, and the vulnerabilities, penetration kind of tests, and all that stuff. The platform.
Yeah, but you have to plan for it, right?
Let's hear from Willie over here.
Yeah, one of the things that we see a lot of, the in-device area of IoT is really open to vulnerabilities, mostly because the folks who are coming up with in-devices and IoT are area experts. They're not internet experts, they're not IoT experts, they are experts on their in-device. They know about parking lots, they know about cameras, they know about all these other things, but they don't spend a lot of time thinking about the IoT. And I would pose a question to the group. How would you like to be the CEO or the CTO at the air conditioning company when you get the call from JCPenney's that says, oh, you didn't properly secure your device that you sold to us that was so cool because it had internet access, and now we owe $290 million, what are you going to do about it? That's a tough phone call to get, and I think that's really where the incentive comes for the in-device manufacturers to decide, hey, we really do need to charge a little more for our product so that we can get the right kind of security into that in-device. Because, good grief, imagine, imagine anything that you've got, the little watch that you're giving away, right? Somebody gets into that, hacks that, now you may have enough information to figure out where somebody is, attack them. There's all sorts of vulnerabilities.
So let me share with you another.
The parking lot, we weren't talking about new waves. Right.
So let me share with you the fact that, we were talking about the end device being secure. And you don't think about it in these terms very often, but think about perhaps 2 million devices that can generate 25 packets a second, right? Now, all those 25 packets a second are pointed at one IP address. And that IP address happens to be the main name resolver for the entire internet. Right? All your business systems that you rely on to work, whether it's order processing, whether it's placing in order locations, whether it's securing some device or getting data on hearts or whatever it is, all these things that use the internet all go down because they knocked out the one point where it can be singly failed. So,
Well, the good news is you're not architecting single points of failure, right?
so that's one of the challenges going forward in the internet is actually devising a system that can be fault tolerant for name resolution.
Hey, Paul, I have a question for you. You make gateways and radios. How do you guys handle it?
AES 256 base station on up, pretty locked-tight security, pretty much as good as a ATM machine. Okay. On the downlink side, we heard the conversation earlier, it's not just about money. It's not about money, trust me. Money is one budget, a space budget, a size budget, you've got a battery budget. I can't buy 10,000 milliamp hours that fits in 2 D cells. Can't buy it, not available. Now, do I want to add a bunch of encryption and say, oh, we got a 5-year life? Or would I rather say, it's just tracking a moisture sensor in a farmer's field. You know, he's sending it on frequency hopping at an odd data rate. Under, you know, it's going to be pretty uncrackable to find out exactly what the relative humidity is in that particular sensor. I'll deal with the fact that link can be backed so that I can have twice the battery life. Because if I start adding all this encryption stuff, I'm sending 32 bytes.
So let me counter that.
Holds 3 of our messages. Okay.
Let me counter that with if your rebate check from the federal government for your grain grant or the purchase of your grain is dependent on you getting valid data from that device, and somebody finds out that those things are being spoofed, bye-bye money.
And I can put that into the same equation where I plug in that those things die. Those things have inaccurate data sometimes, and those things signal that don't reach the tower. Those things get recognized as stolen and hauled off. You put all that into the formula and say, doesn't matter. I can make that assessment. I can make it pretty soundly and say, for those two things. Now, if I'm reporting whether or not Kim Kardashian left her safe locked in her apartment, probably wouldn't think the same way. Because the risk factors are different.
That's true. Every application has a different set of risk factors.
But if I'm just, you know, if I can afford to be wrong about whether or not a parking spot is available or not,
right,
or whether or not a moisture in this particular acre is much different than the next acre over, you know, then that's a different calculus that I can make a decision to not include high overhead. People ask me sometimes why I don't use IP6. So when you send a postcard, why don't you put it in a FedEx box? You know, it's the same kind of thing. It's a lot of overhead. If I want to track it and everything, it's really high.
Well, and that's why
then I have that choice, and I'll put my message in a FedEx box and make sure I get a signature and blah, blah, blah.
So here's another thing that we need to be considering when we consider cost. Either the industry itself will regulate it, or enough of these incidents will happen and the feds will regulate it. And so it really doesn't matter whether...
Well, the feds have spoken, right? And they put out the NIST framework.
Yes.
And it's really actually,
well,
it's actually pretty stinking good, right?
Yeah, so, but they haven't come down on all the manufacturers that say, you gotta pass this test before we let your product go to market.
No, and the problem with the NIST framework today, if you actually implement every recommendation in it, they've done an assessment, it's 2 times top line revenue of a company to do it, right? So, I mean, you wouldn't do it because you have to pay 2 times your top line revenue to actually.
Every item applies to every.
So,
of course, but that is what, clearly.
With respect to this, again, it really depends on what the application is. That comes back down to this point. Because what is the application? If you can get this device to report the data in a meaningful way,
Smoke detectors.
and it isn't going to offset, isn't going to be participating in denial of service attacks, then so be it. But if it's some requirement that your data has financial implications down the road, then there's a different cost. So it has to be evaluated on, there's the scale of what does it cost now, what does it cost later, what does it cost 10 years from now when you settle the lawsuit.
There's a great example from the LED lighting industry. So energy efficiency is a hot topic. DOE was pushing, you need to make your product more energy efficient. And Energy Star was created, a private body funded with the DOE. You have to submit products for review. It has to meet certain specifications, and you get a branded Energy Star label, which is now recognizable by consumers. Oh, I understand this product is energy efficient. You don't have that for security.
That's right.
You don't have a seal saying this is a security product.
I trust my light bulbs.
There's another way to, I don't want to call it marketing, but the average customer's perception of cybersecurity, their brain immediately explodes.
Right.
It's really a safety issue. It's a corporate safety issue, it's a customer safety issue, it's a government safety issue. Then coming from the military, and Tom knows this too, before every single evolution we have a significant safety in order to keep people safe. So you've got to change some paradigms. And one of them, twice a year, when you change your clocks, you go forward or you roll it back, what else are you supposed to do?
Check your smoke detector.
That's right, change the battery in your smoke detector. Well, let's add a third, change your damn password. Just to get perceptions out there. You've got to start.
That's a branding slogan.
Take it.
Trademark.
Trademark.
You really need to make your customer base aware that it is a safety issue.
Unfortunately, they'll change their password and they'll write it down on the sticky note that's next to it.
Hey, this says that's okay, by the way.
Yeah.
That's okay?
Yes.
It is not.
Here's the reasoning.
Okay.
The reasoning that they say that it's better to write your password down is this.
Okay.
If you have a truly random password of any significant length, it's better to write it down than choose something that has less randomization and is shorter that you can remember. The fact that you have to refer to it to write it down says that it's a better password.
But how about a password app instead or something?
No, password app is applicable, actually.
Anyway,
Is what?
so again, I want to thank everybody for coming today. Time is marching on, and
waiting for no man.
if you have any other questions, I'd be happy to take them up here. And thanks again for coming.